Hi, everyone. Welcome to Cyber Judo. I'm Christian Scott, our host. I'm joined also by Shane Scott, our co host. Today, we are going to be talking about important hard truths when breaking into cybersecurity. We're also joined by Bob Barrett, which we're going to talk a little bit more about in a moment. But in the topic of important hard truths and breaking into cybersecurity, for many, it can be a bit overwhelming and challenging and daunting when trying to break into cybersecurity, go through all the information that's out there, know what's truthful, what's helpful, what's useful, versus what's just kind of noise and generative AI slop. And so, what we thought that we would do here today is kind of have a greater conversation about the practical advice for anyone who's starting in cybersecurity, building a career in cybersecurity, maybe transitioning out of technology or software development into cybersecurity. And in reality, this session isn't about sugarcoating things. This session is not about being a shill and recommending some sponsored thing or anything like that. It's about having an honest conversation about the good, the bad, the ugly, right? When working in cybersecurity, the considerations around building a career in cybersecurity. And that being said, uh, we are joined by Bob Barrett, not just a longtime supporter of Cyber Judo, but also a career veteran with 25 years of experience, both at the forefront of helping build cybersecurity programs and manage cybersecurity programs, but also in the space of education and mentoring countless individuals who are pursuing a career in cybersecurity. So we're going to have that greater conversation right now. Bob, why don't we start off with you telling everyone just a little bit more about yourself, good sir?
Yeah, thanks, Christian. I appreciate you inviting me to this, by the way. A little bit about me. Let's just start maybe with education. I have a BA in German, and I think that's kind of important when I tell this because I had a liberal arts degree, and through the 90s, I was told by recruiters, Bob, you ought to go back to school before you get recruited for the war. So I kind of came out of college in a situation where no one seemed to think I had any skills, and kind of had to spend better part of my 20s figuring stuff out. Luckily, right, late 20s or so, I got my first computer, and I remember it's this day my dad got me the computer, and he said, "Manual, read it." And he turned around, walked out, and didn't help me at all. So that was a great lesson. It shocked me for a second. I was like, oh, yeah, this is the guy who's been yelling at me for 20 years. So that's, of course, how he's going to do this. But I read the manual. I left out a keyword there that everyone probably knows one of the four letters of that acronym. But I did read the manual and became self-taught. And over time, I was working entry-level positions, and I started going to the IT department and asking, hey, you got any grunt work, like the worst stuff you guys don't want to do, and I'll do it.
Yeah.
And so that was really good because then they started giving me stuff, and I applied a couple times for positions, and then through
Mhm.
that, showing people I was interested, I got in IT. So I got into IT, sort of like help desk quickly. Now, in around 1999, 2000, if you had a certification and a pulse, you could get IT jobs. It's a little harder now, but I moved up
Yeah.
quickly, and you were getting 20% raises. And so I went through the whole switch from NT4 to Active Directory. Then a couple years later, I got into security, started learning firewalls, and so got my CISP and kind of moved along. Again, a lot of it was just self-taught
Mhm.
and given opportunities along the way, and then started getting more like architect leadership. And then part of the story is I did get a master's in information security in 2008, 2010, which was really valuable because it allows me to teach. It's opened up pathways. So I've taught for a few places. Along the way, I've gone from being that kind of engineer, fixing, deploying stuff, to being a leader, running the program, deploying vulnerability management programs, creating reports, metrics, also watching as other people wanted to do what I was doing, and them trying to figure out how to do this, people paying a lot of money and maybe not fulfilling their dreams. And that has really, I would say, inspired me, put a fire in me to, to help people in that situation who want to get into security, don't quite get the right guidance. They throw some money at it and they're not doing the right things and
Mhm.
they end up spinning their tires. So I think that is a big part of why I wanted to be part of this. I also do want to add that I've taught for several I've taught for several universities and boot camps. And so I've seen those programs. I've seen the students that get it and thrive and the others that don't. So I think that kind of my story there helps set the gives the background or sets kind of the foundation for tonight's conversation.
That's a really good note that you have there because yeah, it really demonstrates the fact that you kind of matriculated through like many different elements and phases of your career growth, right? And you weren't just like all of a sudden I'm a CISO or all of a sudden I'm this or that, the other thing, right? And I think that a lot of times the challenging thing with social media, especially LinkedIn, right, is it's like all of a sudden somebody has 2 years, 3 years of experience and they're like, and I'm a CISO. You're like, okay. But previous to that though, what were you learning about? What's the depth of your expertise and that kind of stuff.
Right.
And I think that really gets to what we're talking about, the good, the bad,
Mhm.
the ugly, right? Particularly the bad and the ugly in regards to there are hard truths in cybersecurity, right? Where certain things do take time, right?
Mm.
And so
Yeah.
I guess like being the fact that currently today you do a lot of educational work with folks, you do a lot of mentorship programs with
Mhm.
younger folks and that kind of stuff. What are some of like the biggest misconceptions that you tend to like encounter when people are looking at building a career in cybersecurity?
There's one obvious answer to me, and that is whether you sign up for a cyber boot camp or you get a degree, the big misconception is if you go to classes and write those papers, that when you graduate, there's going to be this red carpet rolled out to this fantastic career in cybersecurity. It's just, I'll share one story with you, Christian, to kind of make the point where I'm currently teaching now. Met a student, a colleague said, could you talk to a student? He's about to graduate. And you could tell there was despair. He didn't feel like anything was going to happen. Their prospects weren't good, probably getting called back. And I said to him, I go, you can't just rely on this degree you're going to get in December. I go, you're going to have to do all these other things. And he said to me, they told me if I get my degree, I will get a job. And I told him, I go, I don't know who told you that, but I'm here to tell you the truth. I go, you're going to have to do more. You're going to have to prove that you actually have knowledge.
Yeah.
You should have a hacking lab, or you should get a hypervisor and get on your machine and learn how to do this stuff. And there's a lot of different projects. And he was not having it. He's like, nope, I was told this. And he was so stubborn about it. I said, I'll make you a list. And I have this, it's called Bob's what to do after graduation list. I've done this for my boot camps and so on. It's like create one LinkedIn connection,
Yeah.
apply to one job, apply to 5 jobs, apply to 50 jobs. And it's like 20 or 30 things and you pick it, whatever you want. And I said, I'll
Mhm.
send you this list. Let me know and start working on it. And I'll kind of coach you the way through it. And he was not interested. So my fear is a lot of students, they've been told or they believe that degree is the golden ticket to Willy Wonka's factory, and it's not. It's something, and you can get things, but it doesn't really prove. Like, I think all of us, we've hired people. I don't want to know about some homework assignment you did. I want to know if I can call you with my problem with little information that you'll go solve my problem. And if you can't prove that, then if you got some certificate from a boot camp or a degree, you're going to have a hard time doing well in an interview, let alone get hired. So I hope I answered your question, but to me, that's the big misconception. That's the thing that I think we have to dispel. I'm not saying that going to a boot camp or getting a degree is bad, but it's not enough. You need to do more Then, I mean, we don't want just a sandwich with a piece of cheese in it, right? We're going to need some other cold cuts there to make a real sandwich. And that's kind of how I see
Yeah.
the education. The proper perspective is you got to do it too. You can't just be academic. You got to be hands-on. I mean, imagine, do you want your car mechanic to be someone who's just read books and never touched an engine? No, no, thanks. I'll walk. Okay. So
That's a good point.
yeah.
And so Shane and myself, over the past decade, we've built, IT managed service providers, managed security service providers, right? Done hundreds of interviews, hired folks at the entry level, intermediate, senior level, and all that. And what I've seen across my career, and obviously we've always brought in a lot of interns and helped train them up. But that being said, the individuals that were kind of the quickest, quote unquote, nose for us, right, was someone who would come into a position where it was applied and assume like, hey, I got a master's in cybersecurity, right? And then when starting to ask practical questions of what does this thing actually mean? What does this thing actually do, right? Have you done anything like, okay, you're talking about a role that's going to be running a security operations center, or you were talking about a role of doing pen testing. Okay, have you ever set up an Active Directory environment? Do you have any experience, like hands-on experience with that? And when the rubber meets the road, right, to your point, right, it could be a bit lacking, right?
Yeah.
Shane, on your side of the fence, what are kind of what would be one of the big misconceptions that you've encountered with folks trying to break into cybersecurity, or some of like the newer folks moving into cybersecurity?
I mean, the thing that I think of besides what Bob has mentioned, which is so common, is over reliance on specific tools. Or people say, okay, well, here's my list of tools that I rely on, and letting the tools essentially steer the entire engagement, the entire activity. Over reliance on a specific tool set doesn't allow you to develop your intuitions and skills as to where to go after you've collected the initial information about the attack surface, or whatever it is that you're working with. So being able to kind of like build your skills on even like a home lab or some crap you got off of eBay, there's a compendium of things you can go and that aren't necessarily named tools that you can use to build your intuition. And then it's a matter of not what tools you use. You sit yourself down, you go to GitHub, and you say, well, I'm looking for an exploit for this particular firmware bootloader. And then you can start looking for things that are out there using your intuition that you've built up on that. Or how do I attack this particular web framework? Or how do I do this or that? Rather than going and subscribing to Qualys and relying on its results, or going and relying on the results from an individual tool to drive the entire task.
You make a really good point there. So recently I did an interview for a SOC analyst position, and I was talking to one of these candidates and all that kind of stuff, and I was like, okay, tell me some of your familiarity, right, with some other SIMs beyond just this specific one here, right? Rapid7 inside IDR, right? That's all they have experience with. And I would have thought, right, that it's like, okay, well, if you're a SOC analyst and you're applying for SOC analyst roles, it might behoove you to have, you don't have to be an expert in every other SIM out there, right? But have a little bit of familiarity with some of the other SIMs that are out there, or at least some of the open source ones, right? Like, ELK, right? Elasticsearch, Logstash, Kibana based, right? SIMs, right? This way, you're able to say, no, I don't have a lot of expertise here, and here, right? But I've gotten outside of just focusing on Rapid7 Insight IDR. I have a little bit of experience working with Waza or this or that, the other thing, right? But generally, the same kind of principles apply, although obviously the feature sets might be a bit different, right? And how you implement them exactly might be different. But all in all, a SIM is a SIM is a SIM is a SIM, right? That would be the right thing to hear, rather than someone saying just like, no, I don't have any other familiarity with any other tool. So what that means
absolutely.
is you're not a SOC analyst, right? you're a Rapid7 Insight
You're a Rapid7
IDR
dude.
SOC analyst, right? So now you've narrowed down, right, your flexibility, right, and the amount of positions or whatever you're trying to apply for.
Furthermore, if you're going and you're familiarizing yourself with a broader spectrum of different tools and applications for an area, you don't end up necessarily learning those tools per se. That's not the big takeaway. The big takeaway is you learn the commonalities and build your skill as to how they work and what they're actually doing, which gives you a tremendous amount of additional flexibility when you need to go and use a new SIM or use a new tool that is attacking a specific framework, or a new tool that attacks a brand new Java framework, or God forbid another PHP framework or something like that.
So we're hitting on a good theme here, and that being noted, so Bob, plainly put, what are some of the biggest hard truths for folks who are trying to build a career in cybersecurity? Some of the hard truths that are maybe not as frequently discussed on like social media.
So one I like to bring up is a lot of times you hear in the media, there's a million security jobs and it's paying so well. Hard truth, just because you completed some certification, you did a boot camp, or you got your degree, that salary that they're throwing out there is what they're going to pay you. They're going to pay you a lot less money. So it's a kind of false advertising, I think, that goes out there to people who want to break in the field, and they think that there's this pot of gold that all you got to do is just jump in and it's going to be there. It takes time to get there and make. Can you make a nice salary in cyber? Absolutely. I'm very grateful for what the field's done for me, but it's not get your degree and then where's my six-digit salary. It doesn't work that way. So I think that's a hard truth, that you have to work your way up. I mean, you first got to make the fries before you get to be the manager of the restaurant, and so you got to work your way up there. Potential is there. I think that's a hard truth. The second thing is, even though you have that degree, that Security Plus certification, stuff like that, HR loves it. But if you got to still convince the hiring manager that you have the skills. You both were just talking about that. I'll tell you, I talk to a lot of students when I ask them to know the difference between TCP and UDP, and that to me is a deal killer. If you don't know what a /24 subnet mask is, knowing the fundamentals and knowing how to talk and say, oh yeah, we talked about it in the class. No. So I feel like people, even though they're degrees, they're actually not prepared, both technically and in their marketing themselves. They don't know how to engage with hiring managers to show them what they're looking for.
So it's like you can't regurgitate just a factoid that you've heard from a textbook or your teacher. You need to understand the concept. And when you have a fundamental understanding of something, you remember it like a language that you can practice every day.
Yeah, that's right. So because then you can actually tell stories, right? Any hiring manager that they're going to know already, they've been through it, they're going to sniff that out. So you've got to figure out how to develop that game, right? And your interview game is really important to have that, but you can't fake that. You're going to have to. You can't AI that. That's got to come from the heart. That's got to come from that's intrinsic, and you can convey this as a subject matter expert to some degree. And I think you have to do it, and whether you get the most out of your education, if you do and you do the extra stuff, or you're doing the labs, which I've got UTM running on a Mac, I've got VirtualBox on another machine, I've got Linode. My life is about VMs. If you don't know what a hypervisor is and you're not spinning up VMs, start it now. So I think that's important. A couple of hard truths I wanted to share.
No, that's really good. So you basically, you have to have an inherent passion for the thing, right? You have to crave learning about Like
Yeah.
that's not so, obviously there's many adjacent domains in cybersecurity we'll talk about in a moment, right? Like you could do cybersecurity, like sales and that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
right? That maybe require less technical acumen, but even if like you're a cyber salesperson and you have more technical acumen, right? That makes you a 10x, right? Higher performer, higher valuable salesperson, right? Having that underlying understanding of something always makes you much more valuable, right? But the people who are going to search for the true answers, right, are going to be the people who have a natural passion for it, right?
Yeah.
And one of the questions I'll frequently ask in interviews with people is I'll say, "What are you using for your home firewall?" And they're like, I don't know. It's the whatever came with the Verizon. Like, and
Whatever
you
Verizon gave me.
and you care about cybersecurity. Why aren't you practicing that in your own life? Right? I mean, like, it's not like it's something of an effort that requires months of work to do or anything like that, And I think Bob, you and I were actually talking about we'll have a whole Cyber Judo session in the future talking about building like labs and building a secure home network. But like fundamentally, if someone has a passion, they should be applying it to their own lives, their families, and all that kind of stuff first, right? Rather than just relying to the textbook. To your point.
So can I piggyback on that?
Yeah, 100%.
So if you want to gain experience, no one's giving you an internship, then Shane, you just really said something I think is very wise. Then, or Shane, I mean, Christian, the first client is your home network. Go do a security assessment of your home network. Go look at all the devices. Actually act like an auditor. Use the critical security controls. It's free. It's out there. It's easy. Do an audit assessment and then do technical assessments. Run Nmaps. Find out what's on your network. I remember one time early when I was learning security, I read Nmap on my network. I found out about these open ports on my network printer. And I found out, oh, what is this? And I looked, and not only did I have these ports I didn't know about, but there was a default password. So it would have been trivial to get into my printer and to do whatever. So most people, if you want to get started, write a report. Do a report of your home network, or maybe grandma's network or somebody else. And then now you can build up a portfolio, write some projects, something digital that you can show. Maybe you publish it. Maybe you set up a GitHub repo, and that's where you put all of your whole portfolio, show to potential employers, post it on LinkedIn, show people, this is what I can do. And you don't have to go around maybe even if let's say you're religious, ask your church if you could do something, or a non-for-profit. No excuses. There's opportunities. Do some pro bono work, and then develop a portfolio. Then it becomes your experience. Now, instead of the top of your resume being that, right. Instead of the top of your resume being that I was a lifeguard at the pool for 2 years, and no cyber leader wants to know about that. You could have a bunch of bullets of accomplishments of things you're doing. I'm actually doing this. I'm writing reports. I'm doing stuff. I'm making recommendations. I improved security, right? It's recommendations and then implementation. Anybody could do this. You can just do it at home. Eat your own dog food.
I think you make a good point there. If I was hiring for, associate level position, right, and somebody said, look, I know that I'm new and all that kind of stuff, but listen, I can at least tell you about how I rebuilt my mom's network, right, and how I set up OpenSense and PSNs and this, that, the other thing. But okay, you got my interest, right? Because you're going to take it the next mile.
Yeah.
I might add. So only a few months ago, I interviewed just short of 70 people, all right, for an engagement to help them find the right folks. And throughout each one of those, the key methodology that I have a tendency to use is exactly what you guys are talking about. Is I'm going to walk you through. Let's walk through a story. You either tell me a story and you start it, and we'll go back and forth about it, or I'll come up with a scenario and we'll go through this. So we develop the story, and very quickly you can tell if someone has a natural instinct for what the topic is. It becomes extremely clear. Additionally, that developed portfolio, using the free materials that you have at your disposal, what are your network, your family's network. You don't need to go crazy and start installing Graphene OS on your phones, but there's a huge amount to be gained on basically any typical network or any typical computer system that you can get to, and producing those demonstrated works are absolutely monumental when trying to demonstrate what you currently know. Because as it stands right now, just like going back and forth with people and asking them a bunch of technical stuff is not as valuable any longer, because they may have memorized the 10 top key things that you want that
Right.
they're expected to know, or they might be using AI to in real time get the answers for them. So it's just not a way to test people anymore. And you can really sense when people have a combination of the passion that you're referring to, as well as just the stuff. It's that piece of the gray matter that I can't describe any way other than, that they have security in mind in a way that a lot of people don't. And that's what makes a really good engineer for this purpose.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's a good principle to any career, right? That the person who's going to be the best, designer, right, is going to be someone who has an inherent passion for it, right? The person who is going to be, one of the best doctors, right, is going to have a passion for helping people, right? When breaking into technology and cybersecurity and whatnot, it's going to be someone who has a passion and an inkling for it, right? And I think that also naturally translates to another, honestly, plain hard fact for folks is time. You need time, right?
Yep.
If you think that you are going to learn, right, a domain of expertise in and out, right, and build a great career in it, in 8 to 5, right, you are kidding yourself, right?
Absolutely.
And the passion helps you take you further, in the sense of, like, you don't even realize, you're like, wow, I spent time on that thing, but I learned so much, right? And that underlying expertise.
I picture it this way. So think about this. This is a skill that I have that I don't know if you guys have, but probably not. A lot of people don't have the skill. Let's say you have a lawnmower engine, okay? To a novice, someone just starting out, this is an immensely complicated, impossible to approach thing to dissect and repair, theoretically. However, by putting the time and energy into understanding the principles of it, it's actually completely approachable with things you have for free already, or extremely inexpensive or accessible items. The key item that you need that is often what people don't want to put in it is the effort. You have to have gotta want to be able to put in the time and effort to want to learn it. And from that, you can develop a lot more, in my opinion, than just reading and memorizing a bunch of statutes.
Shane, I wanted to say something. This is an analogy I give often, and I love the effort is the key thing. And the analogy I like to give is, a lot of people in December and January, they sign up for gym memberships, right? They make that New Year's resolution, and they sign up for the membership to pay out the hundreds of dollars. But then you forget that, well, I got to actually go to the gym, and I got to lift those weights. And more importantly, I got to stop eating all that junk food. So I think if I can make that analogy, if people think that they can sign up for a boot camp, to me, it's like sign up for the membership. Now, are you going to go to the gym when you don't feel like going? Actually, if you don't feel like going, then if we make the cyber analogy, you actually have to have the passion. But if you don't go and do the work, then you're just not going to, you're not going to find that opportunity. And the other thing I wanted to comment on, Christian, you were talking about can't be 8 to 5 thing. I was interviewed recently on campus for a podcast, and the question was, so, what's your thoughts about work-life balance? And I said, well, I'm going to give you something controversial. I said, screw that. If you're going to work this, then go work during the day, and then, obviously spend time with your family, and then this should be your hobby.
Yes.
And if it's not, because that's what it takes, I think if it's 8 to 5, you can't wait to get out of the office and you don't want to work on this stuff. You're going to be miserable. Your coworker is going to be miserable. Your boss is going to be miserable. No, this is something you have to like, you want to do. Even though now I'm a teacher, and I mostly let my students build stuff. I actually was doing side projects, and I still get this joy of, I saw something on YouTube that looks like something fun. And it might be Network Chuck, for example. I have to do it. Now I can't sleep. It's 10 o'clock. I'm an old man, and I should be asleep 2 hours ago. But I can't sleep until I fix that thing. And if I can't fix it, I will be tormented. And then I can't wait till 8 o'clock so I can go work on it again. And so that's the spirit. And it's not, I'm not choosing it that way. It's just happened. But I think if you don't have that kind of,
You're
I mean, you
absolutely
both
right.
kind of are triggering a lot of things in me, but I
Yeah.
think it's so important, right? You have to put a lot of effort into it, and you
It-
have to love it. I think that you guys are really emphasizing these points, and I can really relate to that.
Yeah. So thinking about it, right? There are some elements where looks like we might have lost Shane's feed here for a moment. So he'll be
Mm.
back with us in a moment. But uh while we're waiting for Shane, so what are some of the biggest mistakes that people make breaking into cybersecurity? So I guess like one of the things that I kind of see is at least starting out the thought process, like things like paid ebooks, right? Like I've always been on the mindset, like there's a lot of information out there, right? The internet is a fantastic place, right? There are so many open source tools and guides and, free and philanthropic, things like, even Cyber Judo and all that kind of stuff, right? You don't need to pay for an ebook, right? Paying for an
Mm.
ebook is a mistake, right? Um, what are some of the other big mistakes that you think people make when they're starting to break into cybersecurity or thinking about having a career in cybersecurity?
So if you're trying to break into cybersecurity, you you've got your branding is so important. You I see so many resumes where people are trying to break into cyber, and the first half of the page has nothing to do with cybersecurity. I mean, nothing. And there's maybe one line item down on the bottom half. Maybe they took a boot camp or whatever,
Yeah.
instead of going back to what we mentioned earlier about the projects, the things. So I think that's a big problem is if you're trying to get in and get attention and get that job, is you have to show your intent.
Hmm.
You if if you're if you have some job description, or you people have like a purpose at the top of their resume, and it's nothing to do with cyber, or you don't have key points about your experience and your intent. I mean,
Hmm.
I usually, after the first third of the resume, on the first page, I'm probably done. And so I see this time and time again, is you have to think and project that you're a cybersecurity professional. And so I do so many resume reviews, and I'm like, no one cares, no one cares. And I'm very direct. I don't sugarcoat. And so people are stung for about 15 seconds. They get over it and like, well, do you want me to help you or not? And it's get rid of this, move this down. Nobody cares about your GPA. Can you fix stuff? And you need to show the cybersecurity accomplishments, the things that you've done right at the beginning. Even if you haven't had a job or internship, find a way that you're telling me that you're about cybersecurity. And I think that the resume, that's how a lot of people are going to see you the first time. And maybe your LinkedIn profile too. And
That's
if you don't do that, your resume is just going to get discarded.
that's a really good point there.
That's right. Excellent
So
point.
like one of the first things I always look at is someone being active on LinkedIn. Are they engaging in stuff? Are they
Yeah.
trying to demonstrate that they're learning, they're growing?
Mm.
To our original kind of notes about like being passionate, putting time into
Yeah.
cybersecurity. Like it's not a one-time thing that you learn all that stuff and then once you get a job you stop, right? Putting in the time and the effort and whatnot.
Yeah.
Like this is an ever-evolving field, right? It's a
Yeah.
challenging field where what happened last year, right, is vastly different than now what's
Mm.
happening this year, right? And we have to adapt, right? And can
Yeah.
I think kind of like to that point, and as you know a lead in back to what mistakes people make when trying to break into cybersecurity. People now over relying on generative AI as a crutch, right?
Oh
Because
yes.
generative AI is a crutch in their resumes, on their LinkedIn posts, right?
Mm.
Them now helping them try to write a pen test report or a document or something like that. And it's like, so it may initially at first, right, kind of seem like it's kind of smart and it is kind of cool, right? But it's all very fluffy, right? It's
Yeah.
ambiguous. It's not specific, right? It lacks concreteness, but
Mm.
also it robs you, right? Beyond the fact that you're doing some level of intellectual arbitrage, especially if you're not disclosing you're using generative AI on stuff, right? It robs you of the experience, right? Of learning that thing so you could actually talk about it as a subject matter expert. The more you use that intellectual arbitrage tool, that tool as for intellectual arbitrage rather than a tool to make, to extend your capabilities, like looking at complex data sets and inferring patterns and whatnot. The more you rhyme yourself of being able to have a deep domain of expertise that you can be proud of, right, and build upon.
If I can recommend a good use for Gen AI in this
Yeah.
space, I would say it has two pretty good uses. The first one is if you are needing to make a report, right, and you have I got finding X, write it up yourself, write it up as you understand it, as clear as you can, and then use generative AI to improve the grammar, to improve the word structure, not to write the finding for you. Because if you do that,
yes,
your concepts and your understanding are not being lost, and you're continuing to build your skills. It's just fixing your bad grammar more or less, and perhaps improving the lexicon a little bit.
Yeah.
And then the second one is data munging. I apologize, I dropped a minute ago. In case you didn't touch on data munging.
No, we didn't.
All these different tools, they all produce different formats. They all have different outputs. They all use different summaries and all these other things. So being able to use Gen AI to build simple scripts to be able to distill these down and normalize them in a way that is then more approachable for you to get into a sim or to get into a report is super helpful. Just don't rely on it to say, well, I've got these 10 findings from here and these 10 findings from here. What does this all mean?
Yeah.
You definitely don't want that, because it robs you of your ability to understand the concept of what really is going on here, and where can we potentially go from here? What are other attack vectors that the AI might not even consider?
And a hidden gem that Bob mentioned earlier, also, when it comes to, I think a mistake that people make is their expectations when it comes to salaries, right?
Yeah.
I have talked to some folks, that are going from an internship to what looks like an entry level role, and they're like, so I'm going to be making 150K, right? I'm like, yeah, are you certain? Have you done your research? Right? Have you done your research on the topic? But anyways, so continuing on here. So Bob, as just like an initial starting point, when someone says, okay, I think I'm interested in cybersecurity, I'm looking to really start to put the time in, right? And they start to think about where they want to specialize, right? Be if it's, something that's like penetration testing or security operations or digital forensics or something else, right? What are some resources that you would recommend for folks?
So, that's an important question, because cybersecurity, the term itself is so vast that we have to really understand, what do you want to do in that field? Now, one of the things that I have noticed as an instructor is, students take, let's say, some blue team, they take some red team classes, and usually I try to make them tough so they can find out if they like it or not. And so I'll have students, I'll give you an example. I teach an ethical hacking class, and usually at the end, I'll have a handful of students say, I love this, I got to do this. And then I have other students say, I enjoyed your course, but I'm not going to do that. I want to defend. So they want to be blue teamer. So my point is that you should try different things. Maybe, let's say it sounds like pen testing is cool. You love Mr. Robot or whatever. Then go try doing some online CTFs. Maybe you're doing some like Hack the Box and you try it. And maybe you even find the walkthroughs to help you do this. And then you find out, oh, this is not fun. I don't envision myself doing this for 10 or 20 years. Then you find that out. Then maybe you can do other kinds of projects where, like we were talking about sim. To me, I think sim's fun because it's sort of this, it's like a Leatherman, a Swiss Army knife of tools and all these different types of logs and information. And I love the metrics of it. It just appeals to my brain for some reason. And you start looking and you can start to be like, it's like Scooby-Doo. You're taking the clues and you're trying to figure out who the murderer was. And you try these different projects and something will kind of click with you emotionally. Like it makes sense with the way I think, or I have this emotionally positive reaction. I get joy out of doing this. That'd be a strong indicator that you're on the right path. And so it might be just a little trial and error. And so that's one thing I do think about, that I think a 4-year degree program would give you that advantage, is that you're going to be forced to take You know, a lot of students will take a forensic class. They'll take something about operating systems, and there'll be an incident response class and so on. So you get this variety of things, and that can help narrow it down for you at least. So I would recommend try different things. The other thing I would say too is these things might seem hard at first, but I tell people all the time, fake it till you make it. That's what I did. Pretend that you belong. And even if you don't understand, just do it. Sometimes the understanding comes afterwards. First, you accept it, then you start to understand it, and then what seems hard will become unbelievably easy. So I think it's a combination of a variety of different labs or things that you can do online for little to no cost,
Yeah.
and leaning into it. Just like a pool, you don't know if it's hot or cold, but if you know you just jump in, you'll get adjusted to temperature pretty quick.
That's a good note there. I was about to say, so yeah, as folks can kind of see on screen here, right? The domain, right, of cybersecurity is wide and deep, right? And you know, when it comes to things like, look, you know, again, not sponsored, right? Try hack me, hack the box, all that kind of stuff, right? As like a starting point, right? And you kind of just touch a little bit on a little bit of everything, right? Start to see what feels good, right? And then talking to people who are already working those roles and what's that experience, right? And I think that allows you to kind of get the good, the bad, the ugly of like, what's the work-life balance, you know, kind of look like, right? You know, how does that kind of growth, you know, look like? And then all kind of the tips and tricks of being at the ground level, you know what I mean?
You know, you said something really important there. You said talk to people. I think that's a point that's missed a lot about people trying to get in the field, because most, like where you know, I live most time in Chicago. There's a really nice, strong cybersecurity community in Chicago. And if you go to any events, with the large majority of people welcome you, and they actually want to talk about what they're doing
Yeah.
and help you out. So you really got to find people that do cyber, because most of them will want to talk to you and give you advice. So that's the first thing. Second thing I would say is find a mentor, because without a mentor who's done it, had experience, someone that knows you, it's hard for you to find a path. That mentor, as they get to know you, can say, you seem to really like this. You're very good at report writing. Or you love problem solving. And the mentor that, and I think especially in college, if you don't find that one instructor that you really like that has an industry experience, you're missing out. You're not taking advantage of the opportunities when you go to school. But it's also, I tell people that are getting their first job, maybe they're going to take that help desk job. I say, take the help desk job, and then your first week, go meet the security department. Go tell them who you are. Hey, I got a degree in cybersecurity. I'd like to work with you guys one day. Make your intentions known. So all those different things, if the common theme, it goes back to what you said, Christian, which is you have to talk to people. You have to talk to them. You have to communicate. And you have it. I think that cybersecurity is a social sport. It's not tennis. It's a team sport. All right. It's soccer. It's rugby. It's not tennis.
That's a good point there. And I would also say, you know, look, at the end of the day, more for people to differentiate themselves. Like, there are some people who are just a hyper specialized technical expert in something, and they're an absolute genius, but they have a challenging time sometimes stepping back from themselves in their role and being able to communicate something to different people in different ways, like key stakeholders, that kind of stuff. And they're like, why doesn't people understand that this thing needs to be fixed in this way? It's like, well, because you're communicating in a way that is very difficult for them to parse, to understand, to see, right, your perspective and value your perspective, right? So as people socialize more, naturally it builds up confidence and being able to present well, communicate across different lines and personality types, which I think is more necessary than ever in cybersecurity, you know?
Yeah, you want that common ground, right? One thing I could share with you, Christian, I was earlier in my career, I struggled on the communication part. I knew what I meant, and I thought everything about security was important and nothing else was. I mean, I'm exaggerating a little bit. A couple of years I left in the middle of my IT career, I was an IT manager and I was working in Canada, and I was struggling because everything was about communication. No one cared about my technical chops at that point. So I had a mentor say, go take a BA class, 3-day course. I was in New York and, as a business analyst, and it actually, it was career changing for me, because then I got, oh, that's the problem. I have to be able to talk to the business and then kind of translate it. It's like that one guy in Office Space is like, I'm good with people, and the secretary gets requests and then but it's actually true that once that happened, I started listening to my business users, and they actually told me about their business. They actually said me and explained to me what they do. And I was like, now it's connecting the dots. And as a cyber professional, I've had people like, let's say junior people. I say, when we go in this meeting, we're not going to be talking about firewalls or GPOs or anything like that. I go, we're just going to find out what she cares about. What does she need? And we're not going to tell her how we're going to do it. We're just going to say, can we do it or not? And when we're going to get it done. And that's something that took me a little time. But once you get it, it's almost like, ooh, someone gave you this magic key to all these locks that you couldn't get into before. So I think the communication is really, really key. So, and you can practice that in different ways. One of the things I did, I know I'm kind of hogging the mic here, but if I could share one more story, when
No,
I
you're
was
good.
when I was living in the Loop in Chicago, and I was living kind of part-time by myself instead of commuting back home, I decided to look up meetups in the area, and I would find these different meetups. And then I met people and they're like, hey, could you go and come and speak to us about this topic? And I'm like, yeah, sure. Now I was nervous, and it was a room full of people I'd never met before. But as soon as I start speaking, I started to calm down and it just
Mhm.
flowed. And like tonight, probably 10 years ago, I'd have been nervous about meeting with you guys and doing this. But because
Yeah.
I've done this and I forced myself into uncomfortable situations, and you find out that people aren't judging you as much as you are. And once you know that and you start to figure out how to write presentations that make sense to the audience, maybe throw in some funny jokes that are relatable to the audience,
Right.
people want, that's attractive, right? That's very attractive, that people want to be around you and they trust you, and you can get more stuff done when you have that connection. So I just, it was something that I didn't plan, but boy, what a valuable experience that was for me.
So that is fantastic. That I honestly I think I had a similar experience when I originally started in IT, not being very strong in the domain of soft skills and communication. So similarly, learning that like the hard way for myself. But conversely to that, Shane. So a frequent thing that I'll see someone kind of like put on LinkedIn every now and then is, you know, you don't need to know programming to be in cybersecurity, or you do need to know programming to be in cybersecurity, right? And someone's got, whatever their own hot take is on the subject, that kind of stuff. But as just like a frequent question that I tend to get, and I'm certain Bob you get a lot, is so for someone who's building a career in cybersecurity, what do you think, Shane? Is programming a skill set that's necessary?
So, programming is not necessarily a requirement to get started, but having those foundationals when you get started are absolutely going to be a humongous advantage. But as you matriculate into more advanced operations, you're absolutely going to want to have develop some skills in Python or some skills in C Sharp. Honestly, preferably Python, since a lot of the open source tools are based in Python. Having those skills not only allow you to be able to look at the tools and understand them, let alone debug and troubleshoot them, because a lot of them are open source and a little bit sketchy when it comes to running them, but it also gives you foundational knowledge about how things work, which allows you to work through, like, how could I potentially take advantage of this Python framework that's serving a web page, or how can I potentially take advantage of this traceback that I'm getting of my C# application that now I can see part of the structure of what's going on. Having that programming knowledge allows you to understand the internals of what you're working with far better. Additionally, having some of those skills allows you to radically improve how you're going to work with the output information. Again, being able to have the knowledge to write, to get the knowledge and understanding to be able to write a handful of scripts, to be able to munge data into a normalized, meaningful format that is useful for you, is absolutely tremendous. Otherwise, you're going to end up with, an absolutely humongous amount of results that contextually may cover everything theoretically, but it's such a huge amount of information that it's not meaningful or useful when you communicate that to your client or try to turn it into a report. If you do a suite scan of your average AWS environment, it's going to come back with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of findings, and if you were to distill that down, there's probably like 6 things that are actionable for the user that represents the entirety of that entire scan result.
So you make a good point there. So many years ago, one of our new pen testers, you were having them help with doing analysis of an Azure environment and whatnot, and he was going through, right, and he was going to every Azure Security Center and whatnot, right, and like trying to grab each one of the items and that kind of stuff out, and I was like, there's an export button. And it's like, better yet, there's an API for that, right? Better yet, did you know that once you get that data set, right, you can kind of curate it down a little bit, right? And so to your point, right, there's this kind of balance of maybe not programming is necessary for everyone, but
it gives you a huge
it will give you a massive advantage, even if it's not required, right?
And when I say it's not necessarily required, I mean I'm talking about the earlier stages. When you start getting into more advanced attacks, you whether you realize it or not, you're going to develop some of those programming skills just learning how, especially if you're getting to like application testing or like.
Oh, you're talking about pen testing? Yeah.
Yes.
I was talking with one of the young folks that I'm mentoring currently, and he was telling me, or he asked me, he said, what beyond exploit DB, where should I find exploits? And I said, well, there's going to be a lot of times where you have to make it. I mean, there's a lot of times where you find some type of vulnerability, in some out-of-date system, and maybe it's a SQL injection vulnerability or remote code execution vulnerability, that kind of stuff, right? And it actually gets you access to a shell or something like that. And so now you need to write a payload, right, to set up a reverse shell or to deploy a command and control agent or whatever. I'm like, there's not always going to be an exploit for that unexploit DB. That's the thing, right? So if you're over relying on that, you're gonna basically peter out, right, at entry level network pen testing, right? So yeah, I mean, I would say that obviously pen testing definitely, right? If you're looking to move up the ranks when it comes to digital forensics and security operations, yes, it will make your life massively easier, right? Make you a lot more productive, especially because it makes it a lot easier to write complex queries that get you exactly the data you were looking for.
The depth and the quality of your results will be far more accessible.
Yeah.
A practical story about this is that late last year I was working with a penetration tester. He's starting to get into hardware hacking. I walked him through how to do. He had no soldering skills. His soldering was atrocious. When I saw the pictures, like, dude, you get this soldering iron, and then we'll get started. When I walked them through it, started in this new area of hardware hacking, dumping the firmware and then starting to analyze it. And by the time we got to the point where we were able to essentially root this firmware on this off-the-shelf device, he said to me, I've essentially learned the basics of assembly language, something I thought I would never use. And it's one of those things. You end up developing some of these skills, and if you have the skills already, it gets you that much further ahead because, frankly, you wouldn't want to be assessing a person as a doctor without kind of having a foundational understanding of how the organs work together. Well, the same thing is true with computers. So
yeah, that's a good point. So one of the things I'd be remiss if I didn't call out is I over, many years, especially here in Cyber Judo, we've created various kind of like certification paths for folks and whatnot. I've done that for a lot of my employees, and, be it if it was pen testing or something else, right? But I got to say, so Paul Jeremy, he keeps this up to date. This is open source, is on GitHub. Also, again, not sponsored, but you should always like donate where possible to people who make great content like this, right? He has a breakdown of certification roadmaps and across every major domain. Now, I want to note this, that certifications don't make the person, right? Certifications are helpful. They're going to definitely demonstrate your tenacity of sitting down, learning something and studying and that kind of stuff, right? And, it's going to certainly help you in regards to what the resume looks like and getting the interview, but securing the interview, building a career, right? Being actually good at what you do and how you do it, right? Again, all foundationally backed by certifications, but that's going to be actually on your experience and where you take your experience. Yeah. To your point, Bob.
Absolutely. I might say the only time I would interview someone solely based on their certifications is if they had a list of 200 certifications like we see here on the screen, purely out of curiosity. If this is legitimate, where, how hard are you bluffing here?
I met a guy once, and I think he was certification hound, I called him. Just passed test after test after test. When do you have time to actually do it? Right. Practice. He's just good at passing tests. And I found it amusing. That's why, Shane, when you said that, I was like, I saw a guy like that. I'm like, all right, I met him. That's cool. Don't want him working for me. But
Right. Yeah.
Well,
this just says it to interview.
Yeah.
But
of course.
The actual criteria.
Let him write a book.
That's a good background for a book, because people see, oh my God, he knows everything. So that'll sell it.
So I ironically, I would say I probably get this once a month where I'll have somebody connect with me on LinkedIn. Like, hey, you want to buy some certifications? And I'm like, do you not know who you're talking to right now? You're like, what is wrong with you, right? And that's another element, is that there is unfortunately a lot of fraud. Which, look, again, same thing with generative, relying on generative AI too much, right? And doing intellectual arbitrage, right? And if you buy certifications or you're trying to buy your way into things, like cybersecurity is a pillar of trust in this industry, right? So you start yourself out on a really bad foot when you misrepresent yourself. Bob, something that we were talking about a little bit earlier, and I think you talked about your own experience in this regard, is help desk, right? And I've seen circumstances where someone's having a challenging time breaking into cybersecurity and that kind of stuff. Does it make sense that if someone is having a challenging time breaking in, right, that it might be helpful to reinforce their knowledge in a domain like starting on the help desk? And if so, why?
I might even sound a little controversial. I might say you should start at the help desk. And here's why I say it. Well, if you don't know the basics of a mouse and a keyboard and setting up a computer and installing software and all the basics, how the hell are you going to secure it? That's the question I ask, if you don't understand it. And if you don't understand the basics of technology, I think as a misconception, I'm just going to break into cybersecurity. Well, I think cybersecurity is an attribute of technology. It's how we do it better with more reliability. But if you don't know the basics, how are you going to do that? And I think it's an easier entry path if you say, no, I'm going to shoot for, I want to get a help desk job, learn it, understand the whole operations from taking phone calls, dealing with tickets, solving problems when it's not in the manual. Those are the kind of skills that will translate very well in cyber. And then, because you're actually doing security. A lot of help desk people, they're actually adding someone to an AD group. They get a request or onboarding. So you're actually doing security, it's just not in your title. So you actually get a little bit of sort of let's say a cyber apprenticeship in a way, as part of doing all the other stuff. I think that's an ideal way to get it. Now, if you've been working as a Windows engineer for 10 years, different, right? You probably
Yeah.
already have some of the stuff. Then that's you could make a nice transition. But for the newbies to the field, I would think. So I've told my students is I would recommend a two-prong approach. Apply for all the cyber jobs. Why reject yourself? Go do it, and then see if you can get interviews. Because those interviews, even if you don't get the job, are invaluable. You can find out what hiring managers are looking for. And at the same time, get the help desk, because help desk, that's experience. That experience, put a two years of help desk compared to 4-year degree. I'll take the 2 years of help desk. I want someone that's battle tested. And
Bingo.
then, so I
Agreed.
think, yeah, I think students should, my students, I tell them, take both approaches. And some of them are telling me that, like, yeah, because they're going through that. I've heard some people say, "Wow, I get my degree as no, I'm going to work help desk." Well, you're shooting yourself in the foot. You're limiting your options, and it might be the only viable option for you unless dad owns the company. So that's, yeah, I'm sorry, but some people that I do see that.
Yeah.
I have had students they're kind of arrogant, and I find out their dad owns a company. I'm like, okay, I don't need to preach to that person because they're not going to listen. But yeah, you just know, right? You just know. But
Yeah.
but I think that's a great question. Please, I would say any of you out there, you've kind of done some of your study, you got some skills. Oh, cast a wide net. But I think you should look at both avenues, especially if you spent 3-6 months and you're not getting any traction on the direct cyber jobs. Go look at help desk. It's a good experience. I've been a director over help desk, and it's a customer service element too. So you work with people, and you have the
Yeah.
people challenges. You develop the communication skills the three of us have been talking about today. The being able to interact with people. At the same time, you touch all the technology in the company, usually a help desk. You touch everything. And then you understand, now you kind of learn how the sausage is made. And then you show up on time. You do the extra. Don't do the minimum. Don't be an 8 to 5er. You do the extra. You do the crap nobody else wants to do. And then you show everybody like, oh yeah, this is someone we can count on. And that's the kind of person I want in my cyber team. So how's that for an answer? That's how I feel
love
about
that.
it.
I think that's a great answer. I was going to say, if you start out that way as well, it also gives you the ability to have that extra psychological energy. You won't be tapped out at the end of the day, even if you do the extra, most likely, which gives you the extra energy to go in and do more of these things at home, like auditing your own network or just experimenting with tools. Go to your local pawn shop. Those places are chock full of old devices that you can go and buy for next to nothing and hack. eBay is great for old routers and there's all kinds of things you can use to build a lab. And then to your point earlier, virtual machines. I mean, powerful computers with enough memory to run a handful of virtual machines are accessible to almost everyone. It's hard for me to I'd be hard pressed to say that even your average person doesn't have a machine that can run VM with Kali Linux for getting started, or an old version of Windows XP for you to test against, things like that.
So, gentlemen, it sounds like we have two fantastic topics that we'll be able to cover in the future. One about, building, a security testing lab and environment. Maybe I'll come up with some interesting name like, friends don't let friends use ISP firewalls or ISP provided firewalls, right? So building your own lab, building your own secure network, that kind of stuff, right? And then two, right, is, we focus obviously predominantly this conversation today for, folks who are usually coming out of college, right? Or younger folks who are thinking about going to college for cybersecurity, right? Or maybe someone who's, at a help desk level and starting to kind of think about moving into cybersecurity, right? But then what about all the folks that are your software developers, right? Your systems engineers and that kind of stuff. How do they transition to cybersecurity? Which is, that is a very relevant topic. So I think we'll have a follow-up session, right? More geared towards, those types of folks in the near future, which Shane, you and I can obviously talk about that day long because that comes from our background. But that being all noted, I'm looking forward to having those sessions in the future. Bob, Shane, thank you, gentlemen, for joining me tonight. I really appreciate it. Everyone who is watching right now, thank you for joining us, and stay tuned for the next episode. Bye, team.
Take care, all.
Bye, everybody.
Check your